Recently I was playing Doom Eternal. I know I'm a bit late, but bear with me. In the game, there's a space base that you return to between missions, and it has a bunch of rooms you can explore, one of which has a few bookshelves. On this shelf there's a few books that have an author, Flynn Taggart. This is also a code that unlocks some secrets if you type it into a computer. This name stood out to me because back in the mid-90s, I was a huge fan of the 4-book novelization of the Doom games. Flynn Taggart was the protagonist, the real name of the Doom guy. It was a bit of a surprise to see it in an official game, since I didn't think there was a lot of love for these novels. I even recall an interview with Doom co-creator John Romero, where he said that he never read them and specifically mentioned that he doesn't like that name.
Did you ever read the Doom books, John? The 4 novels that were done?
I did not read those. David Abhue, I think, was the guy who
That's
wrote
right.
those. And Brad Lynn Weaver.
Yeah, that's correct. I actually thought the first 2 were really good. I really enjoyed them.
I have them.
Yeah, they were little sort of novelizations of the first 2 games. And then the second 2 books, books 3 and 4, I thought were not nearly as good. They were their own stories, and they went off into some strange places.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that it was just, I wouldn't have named the guy
Flynn.
Yeah, Flint McTaggart.
Flynn Taggart. Yeah.
Or Flint Taggart. Yeah, I wouldn't
They
have done
call
that.
him Fly. Like Fly.
I read these books when I was probably a little too young to actually be reading them. They are pretty violent, but I absolutely loved them. I read the whole series a bunch of times thinking it was just like the most badass set of books a 5th grader could want to read. But also, these things are absolutely bizarre. The series came out back in '94 when there wasn't exactly a lot of story to build on in the games, but they wrote 4 books about it anyway, and this book series is what I want to talk about today. I recently flew home to visit my folks and dug through their boxes of my old stuff they still had in the basement. In with the Animorphs and the Goosebump books, next to the Battletech and the Redwall novels, I finally found my old copies of the Doom books. Or at least most of them. I never got my hands back on book number 1, book 3 was missing half its pages, but c'est la vie. So the first Doom book covers the story of the first Doom game. Did the first Doom even have a story? Yes, but not a lot to build a novel on. The game's manual has a single page of text describing how the protagonist is a Marine who was stationed on Mars after striking a superior officer. Mars and its 2 moons, Phobos and Deimos, are home to some sort of portals built long ago by some unknown entity. Something attacks, Doom Guy separated from his buddies who all die, and now he's on his own. The book mostly sticks to this. Flynn Taggart, who goes by the nickname Fly, is on a mission in the fictional country of Kafiristan. He's ordered to fire on civilians by a jumpy officer of bad intel. Fly instead chooses to knock him out. Before he can be court-martialed, Fly's unit is sent to Phobos to deal with an unknown incident. While the game story has the Marine isolated on the perimeter when demons attack, the book has Fly under guard awaiting trial. When they start hearing screams, gunshots, and monstrous growling over the radio, Fly knocks out his guards and escapes to help his fellow soldiers, or at least maybe escape the moon. So who is Fly Taggart? While the Doomslayer from the modern Doom games is basically a psychotic, rage-fueled murder machine, Fly is a little more normal. He's tough, but he's also scared of what's happening. He has kind of a sarcastic sense of humor. Fly frequently thinks about his Catholic school education when faced with the demonic monsters invading the facility, but he's not super religious himself. Instead, he has an almost religious devotion to the Marine Corps. His sense of duty and loyalty to the Corps is a big part of what keeps him going. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the first book since it's the most straightforward. Fly escapes and starts moving deeper into the facility. He comes across a few of his former squad mates who have been turned into zombies that attack him. He encounters various monsters from the game. For the most part, it reads pretty similar to the game. And there's definitely a few places where you can tell what area of the game they're describing as Fly moves through it. There's this passage. Pools of thick green liquid bubbled on both sides of me. The stuff was luminescent, probably radioactive. It looked like boiling lava on St. Patrick's Day. I wasn't going to stop and run any experiments, but I had no doubt this gunk would eat right through my combat suit, given enough time. No sooner had this thought crossed my mind than a ton of bricks slammed into me from the right. As the large body moved into sight, I saw brown leathery skin, rough like alligator hide, with ivory-light horns sticking out from his chest, arms, and legs. The head was inhumanly hued, with maddened slits of red for eyes. It was a monster. It was a demon. Fly begins finding arrows on the walls, marking the way forward with the initials AS. Fly believes that this means one of his squad mates, Arlene Sanders, has survived. Arlene is Fly's best friend, and there's a few scattered flashbacks filling out their close, but non-romantic relationship. These flashbacks help break up the repetitive action of Fly entering a new area, and then shooting a bunch of bad guys, and then moving on to the next area. Fly fights the Barons of Hell, takes a teleporter to Deimos, the second moon of Mars, and personally, when I read these books, I'd only played the shareware version of Doom, so at this time, this was where my knowledge of the games ended. On Deimos, Fly finally meets up with Arlene, the only other survivor of the earlier battle. Arlene reveals that Deimos has somehow disappeared from Mars' orbit, making escape unlikely. So the two agree to move forward and see if they can somehow stop the invasion from reaching Earth. Fly and Arlene fight through the second facility, they kill the Cyber Demon boss, and they leave Deimos. In the game, the player arrives in Hell itself. In the book, they enter a hyperspace tunnel that the invaders were using to move the moon. They encounter a UAC computer programmer named Bill, who had been captured by the invaders. Throughout the book, Fly and Arlene wonder who's behind all these monsters, as none of them seems intelligent enough to actually plan an invasion. Bill tells them that the spider mastermind is controlling everything. Bill dies during the final fight, but they manage to defeat it and destroy a bunch of important equipment, and this seems to cause the other monsters to turn on each other. They triumphantly return to the surface, only to see that Deimos is now orbiting Earth, and that the true invasion has already started. Book 1 is probably about as good a Doom book as you could expect. It's not going to win any literary awards, but if you want a story that covers the events of the game, this is what you're going to get. The main problem is, just reading about Fly moving from room to room shooting monsters gets pretty old pretty quick. Book 2, Hell on Earth, is loosely based on Doom 2. Again, the story for this game is pretty sparse. In the game, the player arrives back on Earth, only to find it already under demon attack. The surviving humans have a plan to abandon the planet, but the demons have a fiery force field that prevents them from using the remaining starport. It's up to the player to fight their way in and shut it down. Eventually, they'll find the entry point from Hell that the demons are using and go into Hell to shut it down from the other side. The book starts with Fly and Arlene still trapped on Deimos, which is now orbiting Earth. With no functioning spacecraft, the two are forced to build their own out of leftover spare parts before the facility runs out of air. They make it and crash land in Utah. They start walking toward the nearest city and are found by soldiers stationed there. It turns out that most world governments, including the United States, have already surrendered to the invaders, and there's tons of human collaborators working with them. Salt Lake City, under the control of the Mormon Church, is one of the last surviving centers of resistance in North America. Apparently they've been preparing for the end times and have bunkers full of stockpiled food and weapons. Just on another personal note, when I read this book for the first time, I had no frame of reference on Mormonism. It might seriously have been the very first time I ever heard of it. There's also this weird detail that the IRS has spent decades siphoning funds to build up a secret military force, and that the IRS was the first branch of the government that agreed to work with the invading forces. The invaders have a stronghold in LA, which is acting as the nearest enemy command center. The Mormon leader asks Fly and Arlene to infiltrate and access their computer systems. They are joined by Albert, a Mormon soldier, and Jill, a teenage computer hacker. LA is surrounded by an energy barrier, so they need to stow away on a train to get inside. They're able to get on the train by disguising themselves as zombies. There's also this whole subplot where Arlene is distrustful of Mormonism due to some family history, but then she and Albert start falling for each other, but it doesn't really come up that much. On board the train, they find powerful enemies guarding a comatose man who is covered in cybernetic implants. The team rescues him and hides in a resistance safe house. Here they also learn that apparently the DEA is also working with the invaders, and they're the ones manufacturing the chemicals that turn people into zombies. Jill is able to hack the man's cybernetic implants and talk with him. They learn that his name is Ken, and he was a CIA analyst. Continuing the theme of government agencies being evil, the CIA is also working with the invaders, and they've turned Ken into some sort of interface to allow the invaders' biological-based systems to communicate and control human computer systems. The safe house is attacked, and the team decides they need to get Ken to a resistance base in Hawaii. They hijack a plane full of zombies that's being piloted by a few imps. During the battle, Albert is severely injured. The plane can't leave LA if the force field's still up, so Fly and Arlene need to go to Disney Studios where the field generator is located. They fight their way up to the top of a tall tower with the generator and disable it. The book ends with Jill, Albert, and Ken flying to Hawaii, while Fly and Arlene remain trapped in the tower with swarms of monsters trying to break in. Book 2 is probably the strongest of the four. It's still definitely a Doom book. We still get to see the Doom 2 monsters, but there's a more interesting goal, and the stakes feel a little higher now that it's actually involving the entire Earth. And honestly, it helps that it has more than two characters. And this is where we run into a new issue. These books were published between 1994 and 1996. This was before the latest series of Doom games, it was before Doom 3, it was even before Doom 64. We've got 2 books left in the series, and we are out of games. So up to this point, things stuck pretty closely to the general feel of the games. The different monsters were all the same, classic weapons like the BFG 9000 make an appearance, Arlene kills a demon with a chainsaw, you even get some of the power-ups like the Soul Sphere, the Light Amp Goggles, the Berserker Pack. I don't know what sort of guidance the writers had from this point, or even why this series has 2 more books, but this is the point where everything starts to go off the rails. Book 3, Infernal Sky, starts with Fly and Arlene already safe in Hawaii. Their escape from the tower via window washing scaffolding is told in a flashback. And this is really the first time these characters have had a chance to slow down without constantly fighting for their lives. The Hawaii base is full of scientists who all have their own opinions on the invaders. Throughout the book so far, the characters have been making up names for all the monsters they've come across, so they call them things like Spinies and Pumpkins and Bonies and Fire Eaters that are completely different from like the official in-game names for these enemies. So there's some fun bits here where the scientists are talking about a cacodemon and the crew's like, we call those pumpkins. Albert proposes to Arlene, but she doesn't want to give him an answer mid-invasion. They receive word that Salt Lake City has been hit by nuclear bombs, pretty much ending any organized resistance in North America. Now, you might have noticed that throughout this video I've been referring to the bad guys as invaders. Throughout the first 2 books, there's some debate among the different characters as to the nature of the monsters. Fly, Arlene, and the more scientifically minded characters believe them to be aliens from another planet. Albert, the other Mormons, and other religious characters tend to think that they are literal demons from literal hell. The group is informed that shortly before the invasion, there was a message received from outer space with a warning about the pending attack. It didn't get translated till it was too late, but it came with coordinates and access codes they can use to teleport to the source of the message. And this is the detail that really bugs a lot of people who read these books. In the games, the monsters are actual demons from actual religious hell. This is more clear in the modern games, but it was part of the originals as well. In the books, the monsters are part of an alien attack force from another planet. Now, it never bugged me as a kid, because when I played Doom, I saw a bunch of monsters in space, and I always just assumed that they were aliens anyway. I'm not sure why the changes were made. There's a lot of religion and religious discussions in the series. Faith plays a very big part of the 4th book, and there's a lot of political messaging, so it's not like they were avoiding this sort of content or anything. The bad aliens masterminding the whole invasion are called the Freds. I am not sure why. There is one line that mentions that a Marine started calling them Freds after he took a date to a horror movie. That is the entire explanation. And this feels like a reference or a joke, but the best I've got is that this is maybe a reference to Freddy Krueger. The Freds have long stabby fingers that could be compared to Freddy's signature gloves, but the humans don't actually know what they look like yet. But we're going to get into some of these weird little inconsistencies later. I couldn't find any other horror movie where the word Fred had any significance. Please write me a comment if this name means something to you. So the crew has to get back to Mars so they can get to the portal so that they can go and meet up with these good aliens. Jill is staying behind, so the team picks up a new member, Captain Esteban Hidalgo. He's the highest ranking soldier and immediately starts ordering everyone to polish their boots and saying he expects them to follow proper procedure. Fly and Arlene have a serious conversation where they seriously consider the possibility of murdering him if it looks like he might jeopardize the mission. The new team takes a ship back to Phobos, they fight their way to the gate, they teleport through and end up at a base on Pluto's moon, Charon. They meet the good aliens, gorilla-like beings who are called the Clave. Arlene describes them as looking like Magilla Gorilla. The Clave operate in bonded pairs, where the 2 of them are sort of like one entity. They have trouble with the human interpretation of individual identity, and they get confused when talking to odd numbers of people. So if they're talking to 3 people, they perceive the 3 possible groups of 2 people, and if they talk to 5 people, they see it as like 10 sets. When Fly and Arlene keep asking them their names, they choose to go by Sears and Roebuck. I don't know why. They explain that the invasion of Earth is an insignificant part of a war that's been going on for millions of years. When Fly asks them what they're even fighting over, it's revealed that the war is basically between 2 sets of literary critics that disagree on how to interpret and analyze a set of books that was written 12 million years earlier. The Freds are deconstructionalists and the Clave are hyper-realists, and I started looking up what this actually means, and I quickly decided that these concepts are outside the scope of this video. There's also a reveal that humans are the only known sentient species in the universe that can actually die. Every other species sort of stays conscious in their dead body until they're either revived or their body is destroyed. If the body is destroyed, the soul kind of floats around until it can jump into the body of a person being born, and then they just kind of get back to their lives. Humans are unique in that when we die, that's it. We are also unique in how fast we seem to develop and advance in technology. The bad aliens, the Freds, scouted Earth in the 1400s and genetically engineered monsters based on our ideas of demons. A few hundred years later, they expected humanity to be at roughly the same level and too terrified to resist at all, but by the time they returned with an invasion force, we had spaceships, global communication, and advanced weaponry. The good aliens, the Clave, have a plan to invade a Fred base and upload some sort of computer virus that will spread throughout their forces and cripple their invasion of Earth. Due to a lack of faster-than-light travel, it will be a 20-year journey each way, though relativity will make it feel like a week to them. Albert is injured in a random accident and can't go on the mission. Arlene accepts his earlier proposal, and they are married, knowing that it will be 40 years before they will see each other again. Fly, Arlene, and Hidalgo go on with Sears and Roebuck to execute the mission. They fight a space monster which damages the ship, they teleport to the Fred base, Hidalgo dies when the teleporter malfunctions. Honestly, I do not get the inclusion of this character. He shows up and acts like a jerk, but then almost immediately mellows out and accepted by the other characters. There's a few chapters from his perspective, where he kind of remembers his own backstory. He was an illegal immigrant that gained amnesty and joined the Marines. He had marriage problems and his wife had filed for divorce, but then the invasion started and she was killed by a demon, and nobody knew about it, so he was in this weird situation where he had to pretend that things were still going good. So there's some complicated emotions and motivations, and I guess he could be an interesting character, but he doesn't really do anything. He almost dies while they fight their way to the gate. He almost dies again going through the gate, so he's in a coma during most of this Sears and Roebuck stuff. And then finally, he dies for good in the teleporter, and that's it for him. So, with their ship destroyed, the remaining team tries to seize a Fred ship and escape. While they succeed in killing the crew, they can't prevent the captain from locking in a course for the ship. The book ends with them stuck on a trip straight to the Fred homeworld, a trip that will take hundreds of years and almost certainly lead to their deaths when they get there. Book 3 is definitely the weakest of the series. It's mostly just setting up Book 4, and honestly not a lot happens in it. It's a lot of meetings, and the big final mission is kind of sped through. It's not the best one. Book 4, Endgame, starts with everyone still trapped on the Fred ship. Arlene is depressed at never seeing Albert again. Sears and Roebuck have locked themselves in their room. Fly is running drills for the fight that they know is coming. It takes a couple months from their perspective. They finally get to the Fred homeworld. They're expecting this huge force of Freds to be waiting there to attack them and kill them, and nothing happens. They go out and they find the entire area deserted. There's no Freds anywhere. Eventually, they manage to find a single Fred body. Now remember before I said humans are the only beings that can truly die? Fred souls just kind of stay in their body even after death, so they're able to revive the Fred enough to question it about what happened. The Fred tells them that they started a war with a new race of aliens that it calls newbies. The newbies were a primitive culture that had only just discovered farming when the Freds ran into them, but by the time the Freds attacked, the newbies had progressed enough to defeat them, and then the newbies followed the Freds back to their own world and exterminated them 100 years before our protagonists landed. Yes, that's right, the confrontation with the big bad aliens that we've spent 3 books building up to has already happened. It's over, the heroes missed it. Now, I'm no expert, I've never written a 4-novel sci-fi epic, but this strikes me as a very strange way to end what has up to now been the core conflict of the entire series. Eventually, they find a lone newbie corpse and revive it as well. The newbie is cooperative and confirms the Fred story. It learns extremely quickly and is constantly evolving. It actually grows new limbs and changes its body day to day. But it's confused by the concept of individuality. Just as Sears and Roebuck can only see life in multiples of 2, newbies are a hive mind with no sense of self outside their entire species. Fly and Arlene decide the newbies pose a potential existential threat to humanity and decide to travel to their last known location. Yet another trip that will take decades in real time. On the way, the newbie tries to seize control of the ship and change course. It knows that it has evolved differently from the rest of its species, and it can't wrap its mind around the concept of being a separate thing from the other newbies. Fly and Arlene manage to kill it, but the delay burns up enough fuel that they're forced to make a crash landing on the planet, during which something shoots them down. Everybody survives the crash, but they're captured. To their surprise, the captors are other humans. They fill in some of the backstory that humanity spent a few decades defeating the Freds on Earth. They know who Fly and Arlene are, since Jill became a famous author and wrote 2 books about their adventure. In a bit of meta humor, the titles of the books were Knee Deep in the Dead and Hell on Earth, the first 2 books in this series. Albert survived the war and became a scientist. He spent the rest of his life working on cryogenic technology to wait for Arlene to return, but died a few years before a functioning prototype was built. I can't help but think that the end of the war on Earth probably would have been a better story than Fly and Arlene's endless space wandering adventure. But let's continue. These new humans are super terrified of death or really any sort of danger. Fly and Arlene become suspicious when they realize that these humans' technology is the most advanced they've seen, despite humanity almost being destroyed a few hundred years earlier. They suspect the newbies are involved. As they spend more time with them, they realize that there's some sort of intelligence that seems to be controlling them. They escape, they kidnap the leader, and they force him into a medical scanner, and they discover that the newbies have evolved into a microscopic form wrapped around the human DNA. Fly and Arlene wonder why they themselves seem to be safe from newbie infection. Now, these people are so terrified of death because they know that humans are the only species that can't be revived. Fly explains the Christian concept of the afterlife, and somehow through this they realize that having faith kills newbies. They don't really explain why, but as long as you have faith in something bigger than yourself, you cannot be infected by the microscopic aliens. I'm not making this up, this is what really happens. A good chunk of the rest of this book is the Doom guy using the power of Jesus Christ to fight aliens. Now, it technically doesn't have to be religious faith. Arlene credits her faith in the general goodness of humanity, but Fly begins preaching to the newbie-controlled humans. He converts some of them to Christianity, and his converts try to mutiny and seize control of the ship, but they are all recaptured. The newbies explain that they are confused by how the human soul is so different from the souls of other species. They plan to use a device that will suck the soul from a body and place them into a sped-up simulation where they can kind of quickly observe them. So the next chapter starts. Fly wakes up inside the simulation, which is a copy of the Phobos base from the beginning of this whole mess. So the book, based on the video game, now has the main character stuck inside a computer simulation of the game that the book is based on. Fly begins running through all the same stuff as book 1, but since the simulation is based partially on his own memories, he has kind of a Neo in the Matrix moment where he can alter the program by concentrating on deliberately misremembering details from his experience. So again, he begins converting the demons so that they will talk to him and fight alongside him. He finds Arlene, and the 2 of them take the gate to Deimos. The story jumps to a different Fly and Arlene who are outside the simulation. Apparently, the newbies believe their bodies to be soulless husks and dump them outside the ship, but they misjudged how the machine would interact with a human soul, and it left a copy of their soul in their bodies. So the newbies take off to invade Earth, leaving Fly, Arlene, and their converts behind. They're able to make their way to a spaceship stored in an artificial moon and go after them. They arrive at Earth to find it abandoned. The newbies never showed up. There's new cities built after the war, but they're overgrown and there's no sign of any people, and they never really explain where they went or what happened to them. They fly to Salt Lake City and they find a gigantic copy of the Mormon Tabernacle over a kilometer tall. When they approach, they're contacted by an AI copy of Jill. She has them answer a few questions about their experience to prove it's really them before letting them land. Inside, there's this hologram version of her who takes them further into the structure. She gives them a book written by the real Jill that explains the whole war between the Freds and the Clave. Deeper in, they find a cryogenically frozen clone of Jill at the same age as when they last saw her. And there's also this small box with an orange light labeled Albert. And I'm not really sure what this last box is supposed to be. I always took it to mean it was some sort of like AI version of Albert ready to be activated. But when I read it this time, like a few pages before that, hologram Jill says that she knows Arlene doesn't want to see like a hologram Albert. So it seems kind of weird for that to be it. The Doom Wiki has a summary of these books and they assume it's Albert's ashes. And that seems kind of odder for me too. Everyone sort of reacts to it much too strongly, in my opinion, for it to just be his remains, and the box is described as being kind of mechanical and electric. Also, I'm not an expert, but I think Mormons generally avoid cremation, so that doesn't seem like something Albert would go for. The final chapter brings us back to the copies of Fly and Arlene that are still in the simulation. They manage to find a backdoor out of the program. They expect to exit into the ship's computer systems, but instead they find out that they're hooked up to a living newbie. They steal its soul and take it back into the simulation. Due to the sped up time of the simulation and the rapid way that newbies evolve, the newbie's soul begins to really quickly evolve into different forms. Fly and Arlene use their limited control of the program to push it to evolve faster, and eventually the soul evolves to a higher plane of reality and just vanishes. Since the newbies exist as a connected hive mind, presumably the rest of the newbies in the real world also underwent this evolution and vanished as well, explaining why they never showed up at Earth. Simulation Fly and Arlene realize they're trapped in the program forever, but also that they can alter it to turn it from a nightmare into kind of a world of their own. Arlene wonders if maybe she can find a version of Albert in the simulation, and the series ends on this hopeful note and a "the end?" question mark. So that's the books. Are they any good? They're okay. I definitely liked them better as a teenager. Book 1, probably the best book you could have written while keeping it true to the game, but it gets really repetitive. Book 2 is pretty solid. There's enough going on to keep things interesting while also still keeping the fun Doom stuff. Book 4 I think is just my favorite, based only on how off the rails it gets, but it has nothing to do with Doom. The writing quality is kind of all over the place. The banter between Fly and Arlene is one of the stronger elements. There's this running joke where they'll get into some sort of dire situation, and then Arlene will suddenly come up with a plan that requires a list of objects, and the last object's always just a really big boot. And it's silly, but I enjoyed that every time it popped up. A big problem is that the plot ricochets wildly between different ideas. Most of the characters have these sort of interesting backstories or motivations that are just forgotten. Albert pops up, and when he starts getting close to Arlene, he tells her about his backstory, where he was a Marine sniper, he was ordered to assassinate a woman with ties to drug smugglers, but only backed up with shaky evidence, and he considered refusing the order, but eventually he took the shot, and his guilt and regret led him to leave the military and find religion. And then it never comes up again. You would expect that maybe later there'd be a scene where he redeems himself by choosing to not shoot someone. And then his romance with Arlene is a big part of the middle book, and then a random injury sidelines him for the rest of the series. The books have 2 authors, Daffod Abhue and Brad Linolever. It looks like Daffod Abhue wrote a lot of series books, he wrote a lot of these Star Trek ones. His best regarded work is called The Coon That Rolled Down and Ruptured His Larynx, a squeezed novel by Mr. Skunk. Real title. It is a very creative but also quite disturbing story where a plague has reduced the intelligence of humans but increased the intelligence of animals, making them kind of roughly equal. It's a tricky read because the animals use this version of English that's all kind of mangled up. Brad Linolever has had a pretty varied career. He's been a sci-fi writer, a political essayist, and also a movie screenwriter. I don't know if it's a problem with the editing or if it was because there was 2 writers, but there's a lot of these weird little inconsistencies between the different books. And I'm really curious if the 2 writers wrote everything together, or if they each kind of took the lead on different parts of the series, if some of them wrote one entire book and the other one wrote a different book. But it often feels like they weren't really talking to each other. I kind of remember noticing this a few times when I was a little kid, but it stood out a lot more when I read all 4 books back to back in a week. Characters will sometimes be told something that they already knew, but then they act like it's this startling new information. At the end of the series, Jill's book explains the source of the big war, and Fly acts like this is a big revelation. But the information is basically the same thing that Sears and Roebuck told him back in book 3. Sometimes the opposite happens. The fact that the Doom demons are genetically engineered to exploit human superstition isn't really explained in book 3, but then at the start of book 4, Fly kind of remembers it as he's summing up the stuff that already happened. Probably the biggest one is in book 4, Fly suddenly reveals he has a fiancée. He says, "I felt homesick. Just a few months ago, my time, I was wasting my life at Camp Pendleton, loafing and pulling the occasional watch, thinking of not re-upping and dropping back into the world instead. I had a fiancé, now deceased. I had parents and high school friends." Now I was trying to read through these pretty fast, so I thought maybe I missed a line somewhere, I went back to check, and I am sure that there's absolutely no mention of Fly ever having been engaged anywhere in the first 3 books. Fly is the point of view character for the entire first book, and this does not come up at all, so it's a pretty crazy detail to suddenly mention now. Even mentioning his parents so positively is odd, since earlier Fly cites his racist, lazy, criminal father as being a driving motivation for him joining the Marines in the first place. In the first book, Fly also narrates that his father died in prison, so something isn't quite lining up. In book 3, there's this scene where their ship gets attacked by this flying squid-type alien thing. He notices that it has a shell, and he sort of quips to himself that I'd recommend this thing for membership into the Shellback Society. And this was absolutely meaningless to me, so I looked it up, and the Shellback Society is an old Navy tradition where new sailors who are crossing the equator for the first time are hazed to kind of welcome them into this group of experienced sailors. So that struck me as just kind of a weird reference, until book 4, when Fly recalls their own Shellback ceremony, something that never happened. So I think maybe there was a scene written where they did this and then it was removed, but then they forgot that they removed it and kind of kept making references to it. I found a quote where Lena Weaver mentions the Doom novels, and I think it really illustrates a major flaw. He said, "We worked in a lot of libertarian messages. When the Marines are on their way to Mars in one of the books, they're passing around a copy of Bureaucracy by Ludwig von Mises. I don't know how many 14 or 15-year-old boys reading Doom noticed that we were promoting Mises, but we were." I can tell you that when I was that age, I definitely skipped over all these little references. As an adult, the political messaging is extremely obvious. Fly has a lot of disdain for higher education, bureaucracy, and really any type of authority. There's quite a few points where he sort of muses to himself about why such a strong individualist like himself would voluntarily join the military to get bossed around and work for the greater good. Every single government department except the military is either evil, cowards, or incompetent. When Jill talks about her hacking gear, she makes sure to mention it's so great because the designers didn't have any pesky government regulations holding them back. The references and the literary call-outs can be really odd at times too. During a flashback where Fly is explaining how they escaped from a bunch of monsters, he says that they found an abandoned weapons shipment that they used to fight them. And he also pauses to mention that the weapons shipment also contained a copy of Stopping Power by J. Neil Schumann, a book advocating gun ownership. This definitely does not improve the books. It's usually pretty awkward and somewhat jarring when a bunch of space marines a few hundred years in the future pause to give their thoughts on a centuries-old book on economics. Overall, I think the first 2 books are about as good as you could really expect given the material they had to work with. 3 and 4 are pretty inconsistent, but I respect that they tried some things that I've really never seen anywhere else. I'd hesitate to recommend them unless you're such a huge fan of the 90s Dooms that you need to experience it in book form. I used to be really into these video game novel adaptations for a while when I was a kid, and I'd place this one somewhere in the middle. Better than the 2-book series I read based on the 97 Shadow Warrior game, not nearly as good as the series based on Myst. If you'd like to experience the books yourself, I came across the channel Plump Helmet Punk. He's done readings of the first 2 books. I'll throw a link in the descriptions for anyone who wants to have these books read to them.
"Run!" I shouted as I started loading the rocket launcher.
This, of course, wouldn't be the last Doom adaptation. Very shortly after, there was a comic book, which I think hits an interesting midpoint between Fly's sarcasm and the later Doomslayer's bloodlust. There's a series of books based on Doom 3, but I haven't read them, and I didn't play much of that game, so can't really comment. There was that Doom movie back in 2005 with The Rock that's mostly just remembered for that one first-person sequence that actually was pretty cool. And then there was Doom Annihilation in 2019, which I only learned existed about 5 minutes ago. And that's about everything I have to say about that. Thank you for joining me on this little trip down memory lane. If you like this sort of video, let me know. There is a wide variety of spin-off game media that is absolutely bonkers, and I would love to get into things like the Excuse Me Princess Link of the old Zelda cartoons, or maybe the Nintendo Worlds of Power books, or the odd Choose Your Own Adventure versions. If you're one of the few proud people who has actually read through the series, please leave a comment with your thoughts, because I'd actually really love to hear other people's experience with these books. Until next time, thanks for watching.